The spamming and scamming tactics that have become all too common are doing real damage to our ability to reach people and hold their attention.
I'm Eric Wilson, managing partner of Startup Caucus, the home of campaign tech innovation on the right. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, you're joining in on a conversation with entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. Josh Nelson is the CEO of Civic, whose motto is surprisingly easy email and SMS acquisition for your progressive cause or campaign. He's been a vocal critic of the status quo when it comes to online fundraising practices on both the right and the left. Civic just released a poll that asked Democratic and Democratic-leaning independent voters about their views around email and SMS fundraising by political campaigns. We dig into that poll in our conversation and learn more about the better way forward for campaign marketing that Josh is working to build. Josh, we've got a lot to talk about in this fascinating poll you released, and I just want to hold it up as an example for other entrepreneurs. This is how you do marketing right for your company, creating content, adding value. And so kudos to you for that. I think it's a great idea. I hope more people do it. So let's dive right in. 57% of respondents said they would like to stop receiving all political campaign emails and text immediately. And that, what was fascinating to me is that also included people who told you they opted in to receive those messages. What does this tell us about the effectiveness of most digital campaigns right now?
In aggregate, I think it tells us that the spamming and scamming tactics that have become all too common in our industry are doing real damage to our ability to reach people and hold their attention. One thing I do want to clarify is that we didn't get crosstabs that account for whether or not someone opted in to receive emails and texts. I would say it's pretty safe to assume that
I just did my own arithmetic on it, so I'll take the credit on that.
Oh, excellent.
Or the blame.
I think it's pretty safe to assume that people who, explicitly and intentionally sign up to hear from a campaign are in fact far more interested in hearing from them and far more likely to respond positively. What's sad to me is that digital campaigning has so much potential to engage people in the political process and change our politics for the better. But instead, for the most part, we're squandering that right now by spamming and scamming supporters to such a great extent that many of them are at risk of tuning out completely.
So let's figure out how we got here, right? Because I think part of it is we saw just a digitization of direct mail tactics, which were always sort of, I wouldn't say scammy, but written in that style of like, this is really urgent, because you think of all the hurdles that someone would have to go to write a check, mail it in, that sort of thing. But the internet has reduced the cost to do that and allowed people to just kind of amp up the tactics. This was effective at some point, right? I mean, so how do we get here?
Yeah, I think, stepping back, say, close to 20 years, starting, I think really with the Dean campaign, at least on the Democratic side, campaign managers, practitioners, candidates themselves started to see the tremendous potential of the internet for reaching and mobilizing grassroots supporters, right? So you saw that with the Dean campaign's meetups on meetup.com famously. The Obama campaign in 2008 took that to the next level with a phenomenal email program that raised a great deal of money and reached tons of supporters. I think that really caught the attention of some of the fundraising focused and big money focused folks, certainly in the Democratic Party, and I think probably in the Republican Party as well. And that has morphed over the last 15 or 20 years into essentially a single-minded focus on raising money, right? The phrase that gets thrown around is that some campaigns treat their email community or their SMS community like an ATM. And so, folks saw that potential. They started tapping into it, and they got, I think over time, increasingly desperate to raise as much money as possible in the short term without any regard for, the potential long-term consequences of that. So I think that has led to, in combination with, a lack of any real standards body or any real enforcement from technology vendors, that's led to some really unfortunate tactics where, campaigns are essentially buying lists of donors, sending them ridiculous volumes of unsolicited spam, and using what are essentially fraudulent tactics to trick them into donating.
Yeah, I think that's the right diagnosis. That treating digital like an ATM is a short-sighted mindset that we've kind of boxed in our digital campaigns to, and really limited the potential. And we obviously risk polluting, and probably already have, a critical communications channel for campaigns, big and small, if texts and emails are just universally despised, especially as we start to see sort of the online media landscape fragment even further. What did you learn about how it's shaping voters' behavior?
Yeah, well, one of the most interesting findings from the survey was that 24% of Democrats and independents said that there were times this past cycle when they decided not to donate or volunteer
Wow.
because they were afraid they'd get even more emails and text messages than they already receive. That's a huge amount of money, a huge amount of volunteer hours that we're collectively leaving on the table by swapping donor contact info and spamming people with messages they don't want to receive. I
Right.
think it's useful to take a step back and think about that for a moment from a donor's perspective. So, say you're someone who recently became politically engaged due to some policy development that matters to you personally. You decide to chip in $50 each to a handful of candidates, maybe your local congressional candidate, maybe leadership in the party you support, folks who agree with you on that issue you care about. In return, instead of being thanked for your donation and being asked to get involved in other ways, your contact information, sometimes, not always, is then sold to dozens of other campaigns who proceed to bombard you with 5 or more unsolicited fundraising emails per day. So we're essentially punishing people for getting involved in our campaigns online. And from a fundraising perspective, I think that's unsustainable since we'll eventually run out of new donors to spam and scam. From a civic engagement perspective, I think it's also problematic since we're creating a real disincentive for people to get involved in the political process.
Right. And yeah, it sends a signal that your only value to a campaign is as a donor. And we sort of heard for the longest time that was those emails were just going to a small segment of grassroots, and so they were always going to be with us. It didn't matter, what we said to them. And in some of our post-election surveys, I've been surprised at how many voters received fundraising solicitations. It's often reaching more voters than door knocks and phone calls. And so what should campaigns be doing in light of this shift of fundraising as voter contact?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point about how many people, how many potential grassroots supporters are being reached by these messages, especially when you look at the relatively low viewership numbers that we see on on MSNBC, on Fox News, on CNN. When compared to the millions or sometimes tens of millions of people who are getting these fraudulent emails and texts. Like we were talking about a couple minutes ago, I think the problem largely stems from campaigns viewing their digital program as an ATM. So if all you care about is raising money, it's no surprise that you'll buy donor lists and berate people until they donate or unsubscribe. So I would say that campaigns should take a much broader view of what they're doing online and recognize that email and SMS are also valuable channels for recruiting volunteers, for educating potential supporters on your policy positions, and for getting out the vote. So there are other things that campaigns can and should be doing with their digital programs.
I think if I could diagnose the breakdown in this way, it would be, there's a disconnect between believing that online life is real life. And for a lot of us over the last several years of the pandemic, we've realized just how much, online life has become real life. So for example, you and I have really only ever interacted online. We met in person for the first time a few months ago at a conference. But that's true for voters as well. And, I think is really eye-opening in your data that a third of voters receiving these messages find them annoying and they don't work. 68% of the people you surveyed said they didn't donate. So I'm curious, how do campaigns still justify the effort and the expense of these programs? Is there a reckoning on the horizon?
I think there might be. Many campaigns are defining success too narrowly,
Mm.
right? So they're only paying attention to short term dollars raised without taking into account the damage their digital fundraising programs might be doing to their candidate's reputation and to their long term fundraising prospects. And so, if you are just if you're only evaluating your email program on the basis of how much money did this email raise, how much do we raise in this quarter in advance of the FEC deadline, there are, I hate to say it, but there are ways that you can you can buy some donor lists and email people 20 times a day, and you are in the short term probably going to raise a lot of money. I think what folks are missing there are some of those long-term reputational consequences and long-term fundraising consequences.
You're listening to the Business of Politics show. I'm speaking with Josh Nelson, CEO of Civic Shout, about email and SMS fundraising. Josh, with Civic Shout, you're building a different approach to email list building and fundraising. What is unique about your platform?
Yeah, so at Civic Shout, we believe that donors and supporters deserve the right to choose for themselves which campaigns and organizations they receive emails and text messages from. So that's why we include an opt-in checkbox on all of our petitions on the platform that say, essentially, I want to receive emails and text messages from this campaign. We think that's better for both donors and campaigns. It's better for donors because they're given the power to make their own decisions, and they don't have to deal with an onslaught of unsolicited spam from campaigns they don't care about. We think it's better for campaigns because when people intentionally sign up to get your emails or text messages, they are far more likely to respond positively when you contact them. So that includes vanity metrics like open rates, as well as more important ones like long-term engagement and donations.
And so the campaigns, when they sign up, they still get once someone has opted in, they still get the contact information from the user, right?
Exactly. That's right. But the only way that a campaign or nonprofit, we work with progressive nonprofits, labor unions, folks like that as well. The only way, our partner organizations can acquire contact information of supporters is if that individual supporter signs their branded petition with an opt-in checkbox checked that says they want to get emails and text messages from them.
And so what you're starting to get to is one of the things that I really identify as a big trend in campaign technology broadly, which is software that follows the supporter rather than the campaign. Mobilize, I think, is probably the biggest example of this, where it is an events platform that other people plug into. And it seems to me that that's what Civic Shout is building.
Yeah, that's right. We're building, this base of grassroots democratic and progressive activists and donors, and these are folks who, by and large, want to be involved with campaigns. Right? They want to sign petitions. They want to volunteer. They want to donate and get involved in other ways. So in some ways, we're sort of like a matchmaker service. Right. So on one side, you've got the supporters who want to be involved. On the other side, you've got the campaigns and organizations who want and really need to reach those supporters. We facilitate that process.
And you've obviously been very vocal about calling out bad actors in our industry, both in your party and in the Republican Party. I can't imagine that has earned you a lot of friends, maybe a few people in your DMs or inbox saying, "Oh yeah, I totally agree with you," but maybe not saying it publicly. What effect has it had in changing business practices within the Democratic or progressive fundraising space?
Yeah, I think it's funny you mentioned that it hasn't really made me too many friends. I think I think it's made me a lot of friends and it's made me a lot of enemies. So I'll take the good with the bad there. Overall, I think we've seen some progress. So there's a growing number of practitioners and agencies on the Democratic side that are becoming aware of the the consequences of the status quo and of the need to treat potential supporters with respect. There were quite a few campaigns this cycle that sent emails laying out how they think about their email program and why they choose not to spam and scam people. I've been watching debates over these types of tactics play out on the Democratic side for about 15 years now. And those debates are far from settled. But those of us who believe spamming and scamming are problematic have been winning that argument for the past few years now.
Yeah, and I think you've had something happen, just in the last couple of months where between changes with Facebook advertising, increases on privacy, just right out of the box with Apple and Gmail, that is really put a damper on some of these tactics. So I think people are going to be forced to adapt, but it really is interesting. Have you heard maybe anecdotally from folks who have sent out those emails explaining why they're running a more respectful campaign, how that worked for them?
I have not, although I've not talked to them explicitly about it. Although one thing, without naming the agency, there's a prominent Democratic agency that sent emails along those lines from one or two clients, and then a few months later, they sent a bunch more of them from other clients,
Okay,
which to me is an indication that it actually worked.
that's how you know it's working, right?
Exactly.
So, Josh, beyond Civic Shout, doing this the right way and appealing to kind of our better angels of being respectful of our supporters, what else do you think can be done to address this challenge of ethical digital campaigning?
Yeah. So for a long time, I thought that, that it's a relatively small industry, right? And it's a relatively small community of people who, run Democratic campaigns, who run digital for Democratic campaigns. And so I thought that maybe through persuasion, through naming and shaming, and things like that, we could sort of change the culture and change behavior. Myself and others tried that for years. That did not, in fact, work. Right. And it turns out, when sometimes when you shame people for problematic behavior, it just makes them sort of dig in their heels and become even more stubborn. It's not a very persuasive tactic. So for a while after that, I started to think that the best opportunity to I mostly pay attention to the Democratic side, but to get Democratic campaigns to stop spamming and scamming would be for the technology vendors that we rely on to, strengthen and enforce their terms of service, right? So that could be an NGP van / Every Action, could be somebody like ActBlue on the Democratic side as well. And so I spearheaded an open letter to NGP van about 15 months ago, signed by close to 100 prominent folks in the industry on the Democratic side, essentially calling on them to do just that, strengthen and enforce their own terms when it comes to unsolicited spam, when it comes to particularly deceptive or otherwise problematic tactics. They've responded a bit. NGP has taken some strides to, particularly on the unsolicited spam side, to enforce their existing prohibition on that more. When it comes to, what I call the scamming, the other side of the equation, which includes some of the fraudulent content we see, NGP has essentially said that, it's not their place to say. Who are they to be the arbiter of what content is or is not acceptable? One concern that I do have is that I'm a Democrat and I want Democrats to win. So I do worry sometimes that if Democrats on this issue or others, frankly, decide to take the high road and unilaterally disarm on some of these tactics, it could lead to a short-term disadvantage. Right. And so, in the very short term, the side that's defrauding more potential supporters to raise more money has an immediate advantage in that next election. Long term, I think, the side that's doing that is burning out their donor base and has a long-term disadvantage. But ultimately, I would like to see both sides held to the same standard. And that's, outside of, Gmail or somebody deciding to play a really decisive role,
right.
That's probably going to require federal legislation or some kind of regulation cracking down on spamming and or scamming, right? So that might look like reopening and amending the Can Spam Act, which excluded and exempted political campaigns.
And
Or
so Can Spam Act is essentially the federal law that says you can't send unsolicited emails.
Yeah, and it's got a number of other sort of regulations about letting people unsubscribe when they try to, and things like that. So maybe there's an effort along those lines, or maybe it's through the FEC, the Federal Election Commission or the Federal Trade Commission. Could theoretically put some regulations in place.
Interesting. Well, I think that unless campaigns get their acts together, that stuff is certainly going to be something that voters and constituents ask from their lawmakers. Because I mean, as we saw in your poll, people are sick of it. They don't want to receive it anymore. I'm of the mindset that the bottom has fallen out of it. And that we're gonna see a shift. Of course, there are always going to be bad actors, but I'm really glad that you're sort of leading this conversation, and I think people are recognizing this on the right as well. So I'm curious to hear from you, Josh. Who has the best email program on the left and the right? Who are the folks who are doing this the right way?
Yeah, so on the left, one of my favorite email programs, and she has a great SMS program as well, is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'm sure very popular with your listeners.
You had to go
her
there.
email,
Yeah.
yeah, her email program is run by a Democratic agency called Middle Seat. Runs some of the best email programs for federal campaigns. Couple of the things I like about AOC's email program. One, she's never going to berate and guilt trip you, right? So she's never going to, engage in some of the worst and most problematic tactics to squeeze every single donation out of every single potential donor. So that's appreciated. And they were, one of the campaigns that sent those one of these emails explicitly laying out how they think about their email program, why they, consciously decided to treat their supporters with respect. Couple other things that email program does. One is they use it as an advocacy channel as well as a fundraising channel. So there was, I think it was during the bipartisan infrastructure bill debate, when they sent out an email encouraging people to call their member of Congress, which is a tactic you usually see from advocacy organizations, right, in support of I think it was high-speed rail, right? And this is a large, very engaged email community, so that's the type of thing that can drive thousands of phone calls to Capitol Hill, right, and to key offices in a matter of hours, and can actually move votes. Another great thing they did with their SMS program is sort of offering real constituent support. So a couple of years ago, when one of the hurricanes sort of went up the East Coast, and there was pretty devastating flooding in her district there in New York, they sent a text message to constituents, essentially saying, here are some resources. If you need help and none of these resources can help you, reply to this text and we'll help you get the help you need. And as far as I know, they actually followed through on that. So those are just a couple examples of how you can sort of view your email and SMS programs much more broadly than fundraising channels, and provide real value to people. I have to say, on the right, I just don't pay enough attention. I like you said, I'll occasionally call out, like when I happen to see, like, when Trump does the 7,000 times match or something, I'll see those and call them out. But I do not. I probably should, but I do not intentionally sign up for Republican lists. I get spam from Ron Johnson and folks like that, like everybody else, which I can't unsubscribe from, turns out. Speaking of canned spam, but unfortunately, I don't know well enough to say who on the right has great email programs. I'm definitely curious if you have thoughts on that, though.
Well, I think you're starting to see a lot more folks do content-based newsletters in addition to their fundraising program. So I think that, Todd Young had a really good sort of Axios style newsletter this cycle. Blake Masters started doing a newsletter alongside their fundraising usually scheduled programming. But I want to go back to AOC for a minute, because I think a lot of people are going to hear that and say, okay, well, she's AOC. She gets to do it differently. Does one follow the other, right? Is like, because she is, a unique kind of standout character on the left, does that enable her to run a more advanced program? Or do you think the fact that she's running a more voter-friendly program gives her that platform? Is it the chicken or the egg?
Oh, that's interesting. I think that probably goes in both directions some. And I would say with some of the things AOC does with her campaign's email program, it helps that she's AOC, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I didn't mention before, but one of the things I like about the email program is that they will send long form, very thoughtful emails that are intended to inspire you, that are intended to motivate you, or make you think. And so that's very, I think, on brand with her as a candidate. And so I think it lines up particularly well there. So, if you're a candidate who, believes in treating voters with respect, and believes in communicating with potential voters substantively, and in a deep way that doesn't just rely on sound bites, I think that ultimately, probably does make it easier to run digital programs in the same mold.
Right. Well, my thanks to Josh Nelson for a great conversation. You can learn more about him in our show notes. I'm going to include a link to the poll, which is fascinating reading. And as always, if this episode made you just a little bit smarter or gave you something new to think about, all that we ask is that you share it with a friend or a colleague. You'll also look smarter in the process. It helps get the word out about the show. And remember to subscribe to the Business of Politics show wherever you listen to podcasts, so you never miss an episode. You can also sign up to receive email updates at businessofpoliticspodcast.com. We will never spam you. And if you want to make sure you always are up to date there, that's the best way to do it. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.